Terry Barber is a best-selling author and founder of Lighthouse Catholic Media. Jesse Romero is a retired law enforcement officer, a former kickboxing champion with a master's degree in theology. And together, they share a passion for evangelization and PhDs in common sense. You're listening to The Terry and Jesse Show on Immaculate Heart Radio. To join the show, call 888-526-2151. Here's Terry and Jesse.
Pull up a chair, join us in this holy hour of power. We're two Catholics with a PhD in common sense, and we just want to have some fireside chats.
Absolutely.
Can you believe this? Several Supreme Court decisions are making my head spin, but in a good way. There's a big win for religious liberty, and the Catholic League president, Bill Donohue, he comments on the U.S. Supreme Court ruling in Trinity Church versus Comer. Okay? Here's what happened. The Supreme Court ruled 7-2 that the exclusion of Trinity Lutheran from a public benefit for which it is otherwise qualified solely because it is a church is odious to our Constitution all the same and cannot stand. This is a huge victory, and it goes way beyond the Lutheran Church in Missouri to receive public funding for a playground, because nearly 80% of the states have these Blaine amendments that discriminate against churches and religious institutions in the distribution of public aid. And all these amendments are rooted in anti-Catholicism. So this is great for religious liberty, a great day. The fact is that the officials believed that the grant would be an unconstitutional state and an endorsement of religion. And why does this ruling matter? I'll tell you why. You're probably going to recall that President Obama, he basically tried to quarantine our constitutional rights by defining this broad freedom as merely the right to worship. But the Supreme Court has rejected that. And here's another good news. The Supreme Court's also announced that it's going to hear another case on religious liberty, whether the government can force bakers to make cakes for same-sex weddings. So one down, many more to go.
Yeah, well, I want to make one comment about it. Our bishops' conference came out and applauded the Supreme Court decision. But I just want to ask the question for our listeners. Have you thought, wait a minute, in the last 8 years with the previous administration, all these Supreme Court decisions seemed, and also decisions by the administration, kind of to repress Catholicism and Christians in general. And it seems like things are starting to make a change. I ask myself, just ask yourself, what's different? And I'll make a note of it. We have a different sheriff in the town. The President of the United States has made a difference, and I think, in making decisions for religious freedom, because 8 years ago we wouldn't have gotten this. That's my take. How about you?
You know, and this Supreme Court decision as well, the experts agree that this decision could pave the way for upholding the constitutionality of other state programs like school vouchers, where religious groups provide a service for the public benefit.
Yep.
And again, it's sad to see that Justice Sonia Sotomayor,
Catholic,
who says she's Catholic,
yeah,
and also Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it doesn't surprise me, they argued that Christian groups should be denied access to these programs. So they were the dissenting voices. And to me, it's pretty obvious that both Sotomayor and Ginsburg represent a form of legal bigotry against Christians that must be opposed with fervor. How about this other good news item? Okay, did you hear about the Trump travel ban? It's a clear victory. The Supreme Court's decision on the travel ban is good news for those of us that are concerned with national security. President Donald Trump, he praised the Supreme Court's decision on Monday to review the legality of his temporary ban on travelers from 6 Muslim-majority countries and all refugees. By the way, President Obama had the same thing in place. Just want to mention that.
Of course.
And the Supreme Court has allowed it to be partly implemented in the meantime. Today's unanimous Supreme Court decision is a clear victory for national security. And President Trump said in a statement released by the White House, he says, Today's ruling allows me to use an important tool for protecting our nation's homeland.
We've got some more good news, but later in the show, we're going to be talking about some interesting things about inside the church where, I just say there's some controversy, but Our Lady of Akita talked about that. But here's the good news. Police officers buy a new air conditioner for World War II vet. Yeah, it's hot out here in Southern California, and I bet it's hot in Phoenix. Imagine this. The officers William Margolis and Christopher Ware are being recognized for going out of their way to help an elderly man on a hot day. Look, check this out, everybody. I love stories like this. When a 95-year-old man, Mr. Hatley, woke up to find his AC unit had broken down, the veteran called for 911. The officers explained that even though this is considered a low priority call, after entering the 85-degree house, they knew it was still an emergency. So what did they do? They went down to the hardware store, got an air conditioner, put it in the guy's room, and said, God bless you, brother. These officers, I think, need to be commended. And Ware's wife shared the photo on social media, and that's how it spread. You know what? They did this not knowing anybody else was going to see this. Well, God sees everything, right? He's omnipotent. But the very fact that they went out of the way to help this man, again, shows me that most policemen, and I'll just say most, because, I mean, Jess is a retired cop, but I just think that most cops see a need, and they don't, say, hey, everybody look at me. They do this. I've seen cops do things that are just so beautiful and humble and serving the people, and I go, and I make a comment to them, and you know what the cop told me? I'm just doing my duty, sir. Yeah, that's what they say.
Terry just shared something has a lot of people scratching their heads saying,
what?
Terry just says God sees everything.
Yes.
What does that mean? Okay. Fulton Sheen actually answers that question today, which I'm just going to just give Fulton Sheen 2 minutes here.
Yeah, do.
It's I have a daily quote of Fulton Sheen on my website.
Perfect.
And today, June 27th, here's what Fulton Sheen says about God sees everything. And I'm only bringing it up because Terry just mentioned it.
Yep.
Fulton Sheen says this about God's omniscience. Okay, a tough word to omniscience. There it is, omniscience. I just pronounced it properly.
Yeah.
He says we can get a faint idea of what God's knowledge is from this example. Suppose you walk through a cemetery in which you see a succession of gravestones belonging to the same family. As you walk along slowly, you see written on the first gravestone the inscription, Ezekiel Botham died 1938.
I remember this.
You walk a little further and you saw another tombstone reading Hiram Botham died 1903. A few steps more, Nahum Botham died 1883. And still further on, Reginald Botham died in 1861. These tombstones would indicate a succession of events that happen in space and time. Now suppose that you flew over that cemetery in a plane. Then you would see all the tombstones at once.
That's it.
That is how history looks to God, who's outside of time. He sees it all.
Jesse, Bishop Sheen gives that exact story on Life is Worth Living, and we talk about catechesis. If you guys want to have the best teacher on the planet right now, well, he's gone now, but soon to be a saint, Bishop Sheen's Life is Worth Living covers all the aspects of the faith, and you want to get that, call the 877-526-2151. I also want to give away something that I'm very happy to give. Holiness in Everyday Life by The Wisdom of St. Francis de Sales by Ralph Martin. Ralph Martin, as a layman, he's the top of the food chain. What? Higher than Scott Hunt? Yeah, higher than Dr. Barber? Brant Petrie? Yeah, you know why? This man is a layman, but he's an evangelist to a point where he shares great saints like St. Francis de Sales. He's going to teach you the secrets of finding holiness in everyday life, what holiness is in everyday life and what it isn't, how to overcome sin and affection for sin. Anybody want to do that? Raise your hand. Why St. Francis de Sales is called a gentle doctor, how to cultivate prayerfulness throughout the day, why holiness is really about perfection and love, and how to deal with temptations. You know, if you're not serious about being a saint, don't call this number, okay? I'm serious. Call 877-526-2151. If you've got Introduction to Devout Life on your bookshelf or the CD and you haven't heard it, let Ralph Martin introduce you to one of the great saints of the church, St. Francis de Sales. It's called Holiness in Everyday Life. I'm discounting it. Call 877-526-2151.
Another Supreme Court good news item. The Supreme Court has unanimously reaffirmed that there's no hate speech exception to the First Amendment. Remember when the Obama administration said that the Washington Redskins could no longer have copyright protection because their team name was offensive? Well, guess what? The Supreme Court ruled 8-0 that the Obama administration got it wrong and that there's no hate speech exception to the First Amendment. This will have huge implications for Christians. Mm-hmm. And this is good news for our culture because it seems like common sense is making a comeback. And I say this because you'll find that there are many colleges and universities that are using this hate speech label, and they're preventing traditional conservative voices from giving their viewpoint in these colleges and universities. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court has just thunderously said that hate speech is no exception to the First Amendment. And so the justice has made clear that speech that some people view as offensive is protected not just against outright prohibition, but against lesser restrictions as well. And the court held that viewpoint discrimination, like what they've done, and I'm not promoting these speakers, but like Ann Coulter and Robert, the young Jewish conservative young guy, so many other ones. They've been banned from these universities. The court is saying that this no viewpoint discrimination principle has long been seen as applying to the exclusion of speakers from universities and the denial of tax exemptions, profits, and much more. This is good news for those of us that have traditional values.
When we come back, we're going to talk about the Bishop of Springfield, Illinois, saying that those in same-sex marriages cannot receive a Catholic funeral rites. We'll be right back. Don't turn that dial.
Back to the Terry and Jesse Show on Immaculate Heart Radio. Want to join the conversation? Call 888-526-2151. Now here's Terry and Jesse.
Thank you, Lord Jesus Christ, for giving us the catechism of the Catholic Church in this age of confusion.
Amen.
Yep, we have this great gift of the catechism so that we can find the answers for ourselves. Why do I say this? Have you heard about, or do you agree with, the Bishop of Springfield, Illinois? He said that those in same-sex marriages cannot receive funeral rites. And it's no surprise that ultra-progressive Jesuit priest, Father James Martin, he threw a fit and he attacked Bishop Paprocki on social media. He put out 7 successive tweets, and he basically said if bishops ban members of the same-sex couples for funeral rites, they must also ban divorce, remarried Catholics without annulments, women who have children out of wedlock, members of straight couples living together before marriage, and anyone using birth control, for these are all similarly against church teaching on sexuality. And Father James Martin, who's very pro-LGBT, he also tweeted, to focus only on LGBT people, even those in same-sex marriages, without a similar focus on the sexual or moral behavior of straight peoples, is, in the words of the Catechism, a sign of unjust discrimination. But here's the problem. Here's where Father Martin, he falsely frames the problem.
Exactly.
The Catholic Church has never argued that funeral rites should be denied to sinners or even grave sinners. Obviously, if it did so, funerals would be largely confined to the deaths of recently baptized infants. But the Church has traditionally argued that funeral rites may be denied to those notorious sinners who steadfastly refuse to repent or reconcile themselves to the church, and where there's no evidence or likelihood that they did so even at the point of death. If you want to read the canons on this, it's in Code of Canon Law 1184. 1184.1. It basically says this in one sentence. Unless they give some signs of repentance before death, the following must be deprived of ecclesiastical funerals. Number 1, notorious apostates, heretics, and schismatics, and other manifest sinners who cannot be granted ecclesiastical funerals without public scandal of the faithful.
You know, Jesse, when I read that, I think of today's gospel reading because, people say that, well, the church needs to be more tolerant. Well, here's what the gospel says. This is what Jesus says. Okay, reading from Matthew 7, it says, Jesus says to his disciples, "Do not give what is holy to dogs or throw your pearls before swine, lest they trample them underfoot and turn and tear you to pieces. Do to others whatever you would have them do to you. This is the law and the prophets. Enter through the narrow gate. The gate is wide and the road broad that leads to destruction. Those who enter through it are many. How narrow the gate and constricted the road that leads to life, and those who find it are few." That last paragraph, it seems to me that Jesus wasn't very tolerant. He was basically calling it for what it is in charity, that we have direction where there's commandments. If you love me, keep the commandments. And so I say this because it seems that there are people when you, that even priests, I pray for them. We need to pray for them because they are falsely coming under the disguise of false compassion and tolerance when right now they need the truth because that's what sets them free. Do you agree or disagree? Let me know by calling me 888-526-2151. And by the way, everyone, when I give these CDs away by St. Francis de Sales, he teaches all of this too about the teachings of Christ in such a beautiful way. Holiness in everyday life. It's a great series to have. You'll learn about how to live in the present moment in being with God. Call 877-526-2151 to get your set, because I think it'll set you on fire for Jesus Christ.
According to today's readings, it's funny, every single time you read our Lord Jesus Christ's words in the Gospels, he's always talking about how few people get to heaven. And if you want to hear the greatest sermon on this, the greatest homily ever preached on the salvation of souls was given by St. Leonard of Port Maurice.
Oh, boy.
His homily is called, quote, "The Little Number of Those Who Are Saved." I put his homily on my blog today.
Good.
And I say this because too many, go to jessieromero.com, click blog, and you'll read the greatest homily on salvation ever in 2,000 years. Here's a quote from his famous homily. He says this, "And if the damned are as numerous as the sand in the sea, the saved are as numerous as the stars of heaven. That is, both the one and the others are countless, although in very different proportions." You know, St. Leonard Port Maurice, he was called by St. Alphonsus Liguori the greatest missionary of the 18th century. Guess what? He spent 40 years preaching retreats and parish missions, and his missions used to last from 15 to 18 days. And after he finished an 18-day mission, he stood there an additional week just to hear confessions because he gave the greatest sermon on salvation. And you'll find what he does in his sermon is this. He quotes all the verses of the gospel where Jesus Christ talks about salvation. And you can read it for yourself. Jesus' own words on this homily says more people will be lost at the end than saved. These are the words of Jesus. Every single verse that's quoted in the Gospels, St. Leonard Port Maurice quotes it in his homily. So you read it and you tell me if you think most people are going to go to heaven.
You know, when you read that homily, you think, wow, I want to hear more like that because I'll tell you, I want to go to heaven. Don't you want to go to heaven? And the thing about it is that many times we think there's universal salvation, that everybody goes to heaven without any effort. Well, you know, that's just what we call syncretism. That's a big word, meaning that, you know, everybody, all religions are worth, you know, there's no difference between any religion. See, when you have this attitude that God is just going to forgive you without asking for it, or one religion is as good as the other, then what do? You have no effort. Hey, I'm going to go to heaven. Well, I don't have to work for it. Jesus loves me so much. No, there's a connection. We have to make an act of the will to want to follow Christ and then live that Christ-centered life, because show me your actions, because talk exceeds the demand. And I believe that here at the Terry and Jesse Show, we're not going to give you kumbaya Catholicism. What we're giving you is what the saints have said, and that is you need to repent and turn away from sin. That's the message of Jesus, so we can't change it. It's what Jesus teaches.
And this is why Dr. Ralph Martin, who I consider the greatest theologian in the church today, the greatest lay theologian.
I think so.
He says this is the exact reason, what Terry just said, why most Catholics don't evangelize.
Yep.
Guess why most Catholics don't evangelize? Because Dr. Ralph Martin says, because most Catholics have bought into the heresy of universal salvation.
Yep.
Most Catholics believe that, hey, as soon as you die, everybody goes to heaven. And so this is why there's no zeal in many Catholics. There's no fervor in many Catholics. They're just like, hey, man, live and let live, man. Give me another joint. Because most Catholics don't know what the church teaches about salvation. If you want to know what the church teaches about salvation, you can make it very simple. Go to my blog and read St. Leonard Port Maurice, his homily on salvation. He quotes every single verse of the Bible where Jesus Christ speaks about salvation. After you're done reading it, ask yourself, do I think I'm going to heaven? Am I on my way to heaven? Do most people go to heaven? And I'll say this also. Our Lady of Akita, Japan, warned us about, here we have a bishop and a priest that are basically at loggerheads. Yeah, they're at odds about the church's teaching. Yep. And some people scratch their head. Well, this is a perfect example of what Our Lady of Akita, Japan prophesied in 1973 about the age of confusion where you'll have clergy versus clergy. But don't worry about that. You know why? Because St. John Paul II gave us the great gift of the catechism so that we can find the answer and we can see which clergy is telling us the truth based on the perennial teaching of the church. So there's no more scratching our heads and wondering, well, who's in line with church teaching? Open up your catechism and read paragraph 2357 to 2359, and you'll see who's telling the truth.
This is all on our blog. You can go to jesseromero.com or catholicrc.org. I want to get you fired up. I'll tell you what, if I wasn't fired up for the last 40 years involved in evangelization, I'd be on the golf course or on the ball field playing, having fun. But you know what? Life is short. Eternity is forever. We shouldn't even be on the radio if we don't believe that what Jesus teaches about the truth of salvation, because that's why Jesse and I get up every day to talk to you about the weather. No! We're going to talk with the traffic. No! We're going to talk to you about salvation, how to get to heaven. If you want to hear more of that, stay tuned, because that's what we're going to talk about. And that's why I'm giving away the first CD, Holiness in Everyday Life, The Wisdom of St. Francis de Sales. Jesse nailed it. Ralph Martin is the best layman for as an evangelist. He's done so many good things. What you're going to learn in this is what holiness is in everyday life, how to cultivate prayerfulness throughout the day, why holiness is really about perfection and love, how to deal with temptation, sign me up, why fear of the Lord is politically incorrect, but essentially everyday holiness. Can you tell he's in the same camp we are? Imperfect contrition can get you to heaven. What I mean is, we need to know that if we just do it our way, we go our way. If we want to do it Jesus' way, we go to heaven. All right, I'll say it. You want to do it your way, you go to hell. If you want to go and do it Jesus' way, you go to heaven. That's as simple as I can say it. Call 877-526-2151. What do we have coming up next, Jess?
Yeah, also say a little prayer for Father Martin.
Okay. Father Martin?
This Father James Martin.
Absolutely.
Pray for his conversion, and pray for those people that are misleading us, because Jesus warned us in Matthew 7:15, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. We'll be right back. Don't change that dial.
This is Bishop David O'Connell, and you're listening to the Terry and Jesse Show on Immaculate Heart Radio.
Back to the Terry and Jesse Show on Immaculate Heart Radio. Want to join the conversation? Call 888-526-2151. Now here's Terry and Jesse.
You want to be part of the MMA? You're saying, what? Mixed martial arts? Nope. Mother Mary's Army.
Amen.
Listen to this show, and we'll make you an MMA fighter. Hey, in the Catechism, did you know that, of course, we know what a mortal sin is. Grave offense done with full knowledge and deliberate consent to the will. But most people don't realize that in Catholic theology, there's 4 mortal sins that are mortal sins on steroids.
Yep.
or mortal sins supersized. And people are saying, you're kidding. Nope. Here they are in paragraph 1867. It says, the catechetical tradition also recalls that these are the sins that cry to heaven. Number one, the blood of Abel. That means killing an innocent person. Okay? Abortion. Hello. Number two, the sin of the sodomites, which means the act of homosexuality. Number three, the cry of the people oppressed in Egypt, the cry of the foreigner, the widow, and the orphan. Well, I can say this. The Catholic Church is the most generous nonprofit organization when it comes to the widow, orphan, and foreigner than anybody on planet Earth. And I might also add that the United States is the most generous country when it comes to immigrants. There's nobody that takes more immigrants than the United States. And the last sin that cries to heaven, it says, injustice to the wage earner. And that means ripping off your employees. I wouldn't know about that because my wife is my employee and I pay her a fair wage. And here's the last thing I'd like to mention, then we'll move on to the next topic about a great Jesuit who's speaking the truth to power. St. Catherine of Siena, one of the doctors of the church, said that of all the sins that human beings can commit out there, she said that the only sin that a demon cannot look at, a demon has to avert his gaze, is the sin of sodomy. Okay, I said it. Let's move on to the next topic.
Before we do that, Al in San Diego, you've been on hold. I want to get your thought on today's topic. Al, welcome to the Terry and Jesse Show in San Diego.
Hey, God bless you guys.
God bless you, Al. What's on your mind?
Yeah, you know what? This past year, I helped teach catechism at our church, and we were teaching the junior high kids.
Excellent.
And one of the parents said, "Al, I got to share something with the kids." And we had about 15 kids, and so she got this long rope, and she said, "At the end of this rope, right here is where you're born, and then you're going to go to school, you're going to go to high school, college, get married, have kids, and become a grandparent. And if God blesses you, you'll get to live 100 years." And then she showed about 2 inches of the rope. And then she threw the rope out, and she said, "That's eternity, and it never ends. And all of you need to make the choice of you're going to hell or you're going to heaven."
Keep it simple.
And we were all stunned, man. It was just a really great example.
Al,
so keep the good work up, you guys.
Good. Thanks for that story. That's a very good story for kids and for us, all of us listening today. Thanks so much, Al.
I've seen that done before, and it's impacted me every time I've seen it.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, does this open your eyes? There's a Jesuit scholar who says that seeking to defend Islam at all costs is betraying the truth of the Catholic faith.
That's what he said.
It's an interview done with the Register. He's an Egyptian Greek Melkite Jesuit priest named Henry Boulad. He explains why he believes Islamist terrorists are applying what the religion teaches them and why the church fails to address this, because the church has fallen prey to a leftist ideology that is destroying the West. And so he's like a John the Baptist. He's warning us. He's saying the church, don't go down this path. He said the church should not defend Islam at all costs and seek to exonerate from horrors committed every day in its name, or else the church ends up betraying the truth. He's a leading Jesuit scholar of Islam, and he's from Egypt. He knows a little bit more than the average European or American bishop on this matter.
He even respectfully said this, and I'm just reading the article, and I happen to agree with him because clarity is always important. He says to Pope Francis, "Dear Holy Father," he says Christians, he wrote, "are expecting something from you other than vague and harmless declarations that may obscure reality." Now, the Holy Father has already said this. I want you guys to speak to me in clear messages. If you don't agree, talk to me. I'm willing to dialogue with him. So this Jesuit is informing his father with deep respect, but saying, look, we're falling right into a trap. Now, Jesse, he is in Egypt. He's seen the situation firsthand. I'm in California. You're in Arizona. Guess what? We don't see what he sees. He's been studying this all his life. I happen to respect the man because he's speaking from experience and history.
He's got skin in the game. You got people in Europe and America talking about Islam being a religion of peace. They don't know what they're talking about. Let's go and talk to our bishops and priests that live in the Middle East and see what they say. He says, this Greek Melkite Jesuit priest, Henry Boulad, he also believes that when it comes to dealing with Islam, the Catholic Church has succumbed to a liberal left ideology, which is destroying the West, based on the pretext of openness, tolerance, and Christian charity. Mm-hmm. Father Boulad, by the way, he's 85 years old.
God
he's
bless
Egyptian, and he's also a relative of the Jesuit scholar of Islam, Father Samir Khalil. He also discusses in this interview why he believes Islamists are carrying out what the religion teaches. He says whether Islam is capable of reform and how, despite its problems, the religion can help the bulwark in acting as a bulwark against secularist ideology. It's a fascinating article. You got to get it. CatholicRC.org, JesseRomero.com.
Yeah, this is not something political correctness that we're saying right now. And I know that some people are going to get upset because, someone, I'll just give you my example. One time I was coaching my kids' Little League game, and I pulled out the rule book, and I said, Mr. Umpire, the rule book says this. And the umpire says, you pull that rule book out again, and you're going to get thrown out. Okay, so when I quote the Bible, if people get upset, I'm going to quote the Quran. And you can say, Terry, don't quote the Quran. Why not? It's their holy book. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm quoting right from them. Here's some clear statements. Here it is. Kill the unbeliever whenever you find them. Okay, now maybe you can interpret that a different way, but I'm pretty simple, man. I can read English. If that's true, then I'm a little worried about that.
What chapter, what verse?
Oh, yeah, that's chapter 2, verse 191. I'll give you another one. And then, again, if I get condemned for quoting their book, well, so be it, because you want to know what my beliefs are? Quote the Bible. Go ahead. Here's another one from the Quran 9, 123. Make war on the infidels living in your neighborhood. What? You think I want that? I sure don't want it. Now, my question is, Mr. Trump, I think we should President Trump, vent people who come in. If they have that attitude, I don't want them next door to me. I have a wife and family. I want security, okay? So now you could call me a crazy guy, but I think I have a PhD in common sense. When I read that, I want nothing to do with it.
In fact, this article has 25 verses from the Quran where Father Boulad shows evidence that Islam is inherently violent. Okay? There's 25 verses that he quotes. There's many more, but they're just 25 in the article.
Just
now,
the facts.
There's some common sense here about what this administration is trying to do for our country in terms of the wall and vetting and all that stuff. Let me make 3 points real quick. Yeah, President Trump wants to build a wall. People don't realize, I just read an article yesterday that right now Mexico is the second most violent country in the world. Second most violent country in the world. Well, ask yourself the question, does heaven have a wall? Yes, it does. There's a wall around heaven. It says it in the Bible in Revelation chapter 22. Here's another thing. President Trump would like people to come into this country properly through the gates, through the border, through the doors. Well, guess what? Does heaven have gates? Yep, read the Bible. Heaven has gates. People can't go inside heaven willy-nilly. Here's the third question. President Trump wants to vet people and make sure that they don't have a history of violence and make sure they're not bad people that have an agenda that's against Christian morality in the Constitution. Well, guess what? Does heaven vet people? Is there vetting in heaven? There's extreme vetting in heaven. To get into heaven, you have to die in a state of grace. There's going to be extreme vetting on Judgment Day. To me, I'm scratching my head. All President Trump is doing is what happens in heaven right now. There's a wall in heaven. There's gates in heaven that you got to pass through. And number 3, to get through the wall and the gates, you got to be extremely vetted. Common sense, that's what we want to do in America.
I want to ask a question. Do you vet people who you welcome into your home? I think you might. I do. I don't just invite anybody over to my house, especially if they're holding a knife or a gun and they're violent. I would say, please, I'll call the police. I wouldn't say, come on in and meet my wife and kids. Are you kidding me? See, this is how I know I sound like a crazy man. You know why? Because I almost sometimes think that people are so blinded by this to say, use your common sense. And as G.K. Chesterton said, common sense ain't that common. Hey, I want to, before we get the break and we go on to our next segment, I just want to remind you, Holiness in Everyday Life, The Wisdom of St. Francis de Sales. If you have the book Introduction to Devout Life or the CDs on it, you're going to love what Ralph Martin does, because now you're going to learn the real secrets of finding holiness in everyday life. If you don't want holiness in your life and you're not serious about this, about the faith, don't call 877-526-2151. But if you're serious about wanting to fall deeper in love with Jesus Christ and his bride, the church, and to get to heaven, you need instruments like this to keep you focused, to say, I want to stay focused on things that are really important. 877-526-2151. What are we going to do the next hour, Jess? Next quarter?
On the next hour, we're going to build you up. We're going to give you some spiritual steroids.
Amen.
We're going to share with you about home enthronement of the Sacred Heart, which is really the spiritual anchor of the domestic church. This is a devotion that many Catholics have forgotten, and thanks be to God, there seems to be a renaissance and revival of home enthronement to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Hey, don't change that dial. Full Contact Catholicism. We'll be right back.
This is Dr. Scott Hahn, and you are listening to the Terry and Jesse Show on Immaculate Heart Radio.
We're back. Blue Collar Catholic Radio. Here's a powerful devotion that's starting to make a comeback. Enthronement to the Sacred Heart to Jesus is a spiritual anchor of the domestic church. Why do I say that? Well, many people, very smart people, have said before Christ comes back, the church will get a lot smaller but a lot stronger. And in fact, let's look at history. In the early church, the early Catholic Church, was underground. It was in people's houses. You know what those houses were called? They were called domestic churches.
Yep.
And there's many very smart people, one of them being Cardinal Ratzinger, who wrote about this, later known as Pope Benedict, that said that the church will go underground one day. Well, this article offers a strategy. If the church ever went underground, what we can do to make our churches strong would be home enthronement of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And somebody by the name of Bishop Snyder, who's eminently qualified to speak on this subject, he's from Russia, he knows about underground churches.
Amen.
He talks about the fact that this is the way that the faith will survive. He says, it is largely due to the existence of an underground network of families, particularly mothers, courageous mothers, that the faith survived the murderous oppression of those dark times. He's talking about Russia, and he says we could survive whatever the devil throws at us in the future if we all go back to home enthronement. Guess what? We'll survive whatever the culture of death throws at us.
And I would ask you to look at the Sacred Heart of Jesus and then look at Divine Mercy devotion, and you'll see the connection between the two. Jesus, I trust in thee, and the trusting of the Sacred Heart, they're the same person. It's Jesus Christ. And I would encourage you to go to our website to get the entire article, catholicrc.org or jesseromero.com. And I would just say this. How many of you, raise your hand unless you're driving, how many of you realize that we're at war spiritually? If you don't, I'm here to tell you that you are at war, because the enemy, the biggest thing he can do is get you to think that you're not at war, because then he's got you. But if you can put your defenses up and your offenses up, which you have is your Catholic faith, the sacraments, you'll overcome that. And I just want to remind everybody what St. John Paul defined as freedom, because we all want freedom. But you don't hear too many people say freedom consists not in doing what we like, but in having the right to do what we ought. And what we ought to be doing is fall deeper in love with Jesus Christ so that we can get to heaven, because life is short and eternity is forever. If you'd like Jesse Romero to come and power preach at your parish, whether it's in English or Spanish, go to his website, jesseromero.com. If you'd like for me to talk on Our Lady of Fatima, I've been doing a lot of talking on Fatima. I would be honored to come to your parish or speak on evangelization. Call me at 526-2151. And by the way, I mentioned Fatima. Don't forget, let's pray that daily rosary for world peace every day. Let's wear that brown scapular. Let's make sacrifices for the sake of saving sinners. Picking up a pen can be meritorious because every action is like a blank check. If Christ's name is on it, it has infinite value. Let's make reparation for the offenses to her Immaculate Heart by means of the first Saturday devotion. And let's convert our own lives evermore to Jesus Christ.
Bishop Athanasius Schneider, to me, one of the great luminaries, one of the great bright lights of Catholicism today. He says it with an urgency that in this time right now, these dark times, he says it's clear in order for Catholics to survive the next wave of persecution, the church must prioritize the establishment of domestic churches. So what then is a domestic church? And how is a domestic church established? To answer these questions, he says there's three vital components of the domestic church. Number one, you got to be sacramentally married. Number two, you have to have the home blessed. And number three, you have to have the family consecrated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Because remember, the perfect end of Catholic marriage is not merely the begetting of children, but rather the rearing of children to the glory of God and getting them to heaven. And so the Catholic home should be a dwelling place of God's children. It should be the interactions where not the laws of men, but the laws of God are observed, and faith and hope and charity reign supreme in the Catholic home. The Catholic domestic church must be a place of spiritual solace. The Catholic domestic church must be a refuge from the attacks of the world. The domestic church must be freed from the corruptive influence of irreligious newspapers and books and bad radio and bad television programming and the unregulated use of the internet. And the Catholic domestic home must be a powerful expression of the spiritual dimension where Jesus Christ is elevated in our modest home to be the king of our house and to be the true model to rear our children to the glory of God.
Amen, Bishop Athanasius Schneider. We've interviewed him a couple times on this show. If you go to our podcasts, you can find that on the iPhone app, Terry and Jesse Show, or CatholicRC.org, or Jesse Romero. You want to hear a bishop who speaks like a prophet, that's Bishop Athanasius Schneider. And I might add, why are we talking so much about salvation? I'll tell you why. Because it's really the only thing that matters. Really. That's why I want to give you this holiness of everyday life, the wisdom of St. Francis de Sales. I'll give you the first CD, but you should get the complete set. It's 5 CDs. And I just got a text, Terry, slow down. I can't get the number. All right. It's 877-526-2151. I get excited. You know why? Because this is what excites me, to help people know about the meaning and purpose of life. That's why I'm so excited. I just think it's so important that we live in a world that acts like God doesn't exist, that we get a whole hour to share the good news of Jesus Christ with you. Call that number, 877-526-2151, or order it online, CatholicRC.org.
We're just like a lighthouse amidst the gathering storm. That's all we are. Yeah. We're just trying to put the spotlight of truth upon this culture of death. Bishop Athanasius,
what a guy.
Let me quote one more thing that he says here. He says, let me quote Pope Pius XII, who explained the enthronement of the Sacred Heart of Jesus to the kingship of Christ. Look at this one paragraph. He says, your house, thus blessed, shall attain its proper end as a sanctified home, and may contain nothing which could offend the eyes, the ears, or the heart of Jesus. There, Jesus is king, and he must receive in your loyalty to him an uninterrupted tribute of reverence, respect, and love. As the supreme Lord of your home, Jesus is interiorly connected with all of its life, and there may be in it no suffering, no joy, no fear, no hope, in which you do not allow Jesus to participate. This is the meaning of the kingship of Christ. All is sanctified in your home.
Jesse, I got to tell you, this document, 1925, that's when that document came out on the kingship of Christ, the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And I got to tell you, we need this more than ever because I'll just be honest with you. I don't hear language like that too often. And we need to hear more of that. And this is why here at the Terry and Jesse show, we're not going to talk about the weather with you. We're not going to talk about who's going to win the Angel Dodger series. Okay, great. That's fun. It's nice to watch. I get it. What we're going to talk about what matters for life, because life is short and eternity is forever. We're going to talk about how to get to heaven. That's why I mentioned Fulton Sheen. Jesse quoted Fulton Sheen at the beginning of the show about eternity. Well, this life is worth living, and anybody who gets life is worth living, we play it on Immaculate Heart Radio on Sundays. Get it from us on MP3. You can get that and a CD on the Catechism of the Catholic Church for like $19.95. What a steal that is, everybody. Get that for yourself. It's 50 half-hour shows by Fulton Sheen by calling 877-526-2151 and educate yourself so that you become a radioactive Catholic. 877-526-2151.
To get more information on home enthronement, go to the internet and type in what is the enthronement of the Sacred Heart in the home, or type in enthronement of the Sacred Heart of Jesus in our home. When did this start about? This is kind of an old school Catholic devotion. It's been around since about 1942. And the home enthronement basically consists of putting a blessed image or statue of the Sacred Heart of Jesus in your home in a prominent spot. And then you have to do the consecration of the family prayers and the act of enthronement prayers, at which time the blessed image or statue is installed in a place of honor in the home referred to as the throne. This has been happening in Catholic families since about 1942. And it could be done by a priest. Preferably, if you can get a priest to do it, that would be great. But it could be done by the husband and the father with the family if no priest is available.
I got to tell you, brother, everyone, I had our house enthroned. When I was a little boy, my mom and dad had a priest do a special mass and the enthronement of the Sacred Heart at our home. And then when I got married, I did that same thing. First month we got married, honey, we need to enthrone our home to the Sacred Heart. Do it, because you know what? It's the right thing to do. And again, life is short. Eternity is forever. This hour goes so fast. We would love to get a second hour, wouldn't we? How about you? I sure would. But listen, we appreciate Immaculate Heart letting us on the air every single day, Monday through Friday, to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Don't hesitate to call me. I'm available all day long at 877-526-2151. You can pick up Bishop Sheen's Life is Worth Living or Holiness in Everyday's Life by Ralph Martin. Wrap it up, Jess. What state should we be living in, brother?
Well, I'll tell you what. There's 50 states in the country. There's one state that everybody wants to live in. Amen. That's the state of grace. And there's one country that nobody wants to live in. That's the state of mortal sin. And here's the good news. Guess what? Satan's kingdom, it's not going to last forever. It has an expiration date. Revelation chapter 20, verse 10 says, he will be thrown to hell forever and ever when Christ comes back. See you next time. Same Christ time, same Christ channel.